What are some common mistakes you see in bad comic books?
Well, there's a lot of comics that come out that I can't read. You see, in the comic book industry, especially if you're talking major companies like Marvel and DC, they put out an enormous number of books. And I'm not talking on a monthly or yearly basis. I'm talking on a weekly basis. If you go to your local comic book store, you'll probably see around 50 new books a week. What that means is there's an insatiable need for product. And when you are doing something almost on like a mass production basis, and you have a really strict deadline, that can produce, far from an optimal book. So, I can't fault any of my fellow writers who are making their livelihood by producing books, or fault artists. They've got to get the book done on schedule. When you're working for a publisher that's putting out from 25 minimum new books a week, it's a process. And you have to be a little forgiving for people who have to meet that deadline.
So maybe before there was a richness to the story or to the drawings, and it's a little too formulaic now?
Well, some people say that. Some people say that there's a lot of things going on in the industry. Some people say that comics are too woke now. That's a term, okay? And other people believe that it's important to have a lot of more inclusiveness in comics, with more ethnic characters, lots of women characters. The new Marvel movie, Marvels, has 3 female superheroes in it. So, when you have the 2 major comic book companies, Marvel is owned by Disney. They bought it for $4 billion with a B dollars several years ago. And so you have Marvel being owned by Disney. And the DC Comics, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, has been owned for decades by Warner Brothers. So when you have 2 of the largest global media companies that own the 2 large comic book companies, you can just figure that, whatever these companies feel is appropriate in today's marketplace, they're going to do. So comics have changed drastically since when I was a kid and fell in love with comics by reading my first issue of Superboy. I guess I felt I was Superboy or something, right? It was like love at first sight. I remember opening that book, which my parents bought for me, just to keep me amused or occupied, and something went off in my head. And I was maybe 7 years old, and here I am, all these decades later, and this is what I do.
What mistakes do beginners make with panels?
Well, these are great questions because there's no easy answer. Now, when you say beginners, if you're talking about a beginning writer, one major mistake could be putting too much on a page. I'm of the firm belief that a book should look cinematic. In order to do that, if you exceed 5 or 6 panels on a page, it's just going to look like a jumble of artwork. Plus, you have to overlay the word balloons over that. So if you have a page that's got like 8 panels on it, and there have been pages with 8 panels, plus a healthy amount of dialogue, to me, that's not the way to do a book. Now, the interesting thing is way back in the day, like in what they call the golden age of comics, a lot of books looked like that. They had maybe 8, 10 panels on a page and loaded with dialogue, which just forced you to read it and, you know, dig into it. But as time has gone by, comics are now essentially like movies on paper. Graphic novels as well. Saying graphic novel is nothing more than a thick comic book, as it were, a book size comic, okay, in any genre. It's not just superheroes, obviously. So one mistake is putting too much on a page, and that mistake can be fatal to a comic.
So if it's too cluttered, too many panels, too much dialogue, too many pictures, it loses its appeal somehow?
Well, to me it does, yeah. Yeah, and I think to most people.
Yeah, I was happy to see a local library had a graphic novel section. I guess I hadn't been there in a while, and it was pretty neat. And I thought that was pretty
Sure.
cool.
Well, actually, if you go to a bookstore like Barnes & Noble, the graphic novel section, by and large, in any bookstore, is the most growth-filled section that there is. It's just burgeoning. Because a lot of people also believe, in terms of talking about librarians, that comics and graphic novels are great for what they term reluctant readers. You know, kids who have a hard time diving into a page of prose are often more inclined to want to read a comic book or a graphic novel. Yeah.
What mistakes do writers make with structure?
Well, I mean, again, you know, I can't speak for everybody. You know, basically, I really feel I can only speak for myself. But again, I would say when it comes to structure, if you just follow the 3-act structure and read Vogler's book, that's the best advice I could give anybody.
I'm just curious, what country reveres comics the most?
Well, the U.S. It's a U.S. Phenomenon. They say jazz and comic books are quintessentially American art forms.
Interesting. Because I wasn't sure if at one time comics were, you know, just based on some documentaries I watched, they were looked down on, they were thought of as dissident, deviant, sort of, you know, it could be at times propaganda or whatever. But it seems like now that's totally negated.
Well, it's sort of like, remember marijuana, right?
Sure.
You know, how that was banned, and there was a famous movie about that. I forget the name at the moment. You know, but this evil drug, right?
Sure.
Well, the same thing happened with comics. There was a congressional panel about comics. They called it Seduction of the Innocent.
Right.
And it was about the horror and the sexual innuendo and whatnot in comic books that was rotting out the minds of youngsters. As a result of all of that, a self-policing entity called the Comics Code Authority was created so that this seal with a big A in it was on the cover of every published comic book, which meant that the comic book companies had to prove to Congress that all of their comics were suitable for young minds. So, but now you have comic books with different ratings on them, where you'll find cuss words and everything and more sexual content, but it's clearly delineated on the cover of every book if it's for youngsters, for teens, only for mature readers. But the comics have gone through a lot of turmoil, but then again, what in America hasn't and continues to?